Kevin's heart pounded as he watched, hidden in plain sight, disguised as the mansion's chauffeur. He had suspected Carol only loved his money, but nothing could have prepared him for the cruelty he was about to witness. Carol, orchestrating the household like a queen in her kingdom, turned on Joshua, Kevin's most trusted employee. With sharp, racially charged words, humiliating him mercilessly. The air grew thick with tension as she shouted, calling him incompetent. That's when Billy, Kevin's 10-year-old son, could no longer stay silent. His small voice rose in defiance, defending Joshua. Joshua, calm until now, stepped in, urging Billy to stay composed. Carol's face twisted with rage as she spat. I refuse to stay in the same room with people like you and this imbecile child, storming out, leaving a scar of shock and anger in the room. Kevin knew instantly the engagement had to end, yet Carol had traps and secrets that made escape impossible. In that moment, a fierce bond formed between Kevin, Joshua, Hia, and Billy, silent pact to reclaim justice, dignity, and the life Carol sought to control. The stage was set for a clever, daring plan, but what they had in mind would shock everyone in ways no one could predict. The question remains, how far would they go to turn the tables on Carol? But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's see how this story truly began. Kevin had always prided himself on his instincts, but today a gnawing unease had settled deep within him. The grand mansion he had built, the symbol of years of relentless work, gleamed under the morning sun, yet it felt foreign and cold. The polished marble floors reflected his uncertainty as he stepped lightly. Not as the CEO the world knew, but as a man in disguise, his chauffeur uniform pressed and neat. Cap pulled low to shadow his sharp eyes. His mind raced, circling the same worry. Carol. His fiancée, radiant, poised, the epitome of high society elegance, yet a shadow of doubt had begun to cloud his heart. Had she ever loved him, or only the life he could provide? Kevin's lips pressed into a tight line as he reminded himself that today's experiment was necessary, even if it hurt him to play this charade. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere had already shifted before he even appeared. Without Kevin's discerning eyes, Carol's facade crumbled. She moved with the assured dominance of someone accustomed to absolute control, her heels clicking on the marble like gavel strikes. Orders flew with sharp precision, directed at the staff who froze under her gaze. They were silent witnesses, but their eyes told stories of fatigue and quiet humiliation. Among them was Joshua, the head janitor, a man whose presence was understated yet profoundly steady. He polished the marble with methodical care, every stroke of his cloth meticulous, every movement a quiet assertion of his dignity. He had worked here for years, and he had learned that true strength often required silence. Carol's eyes narrowed as she noticed Joshua's bucket slightly askew. With a flick of her wrist, she sent the water spilling to the floor. "Really, Joshua? You missed a spot," she sneered, her voice carrying the weight of deliberate malice. Her gaze sharpened, cruel and calculating. "This house smells like people like you," she added, letting the words hang like a poisonous cloud. Kevin's heart tightened. He could see the flash of pain in Joshua's eyes, the internal struggle of a man who wanted to rise but weighed responsibility over pride. Joshua inhaled slowly, jaw tight, and bowed his head. "I apologize, ma'am," he said softly, the restraint in his voice belying the tension coiling in his chest. He thought of his mother, frail and sick, who depended on the insurance, the stability his job provided. One wrong word could destroy that fragile balance. At that precise moment, Billy, Kevin's 10-year-old son, appeared in the doorway. His wide, innocent eyes took in the scene, recognizing the injustice instantly. Without hesitation, he rushed forward. "Stop it, Carol! Joshua is the hardest worker here." His voice, though small, carried conviction, echoing in the tall hallway. Carol turned her fury toward the child, her lips twisting in a sneer that chilled the air. She shouted, an uncontrolled barrage of accusations. Joshua instinctively stepped forward, placing himself between Carol and Billy. His posture was protective, his voice firm, yet calm. "Yell at me if you must, but do not raise your voice at the child." For a moment, the room held its breath. Carol's eyes narrowed, her face contorting with disbelief and rage. Then, as if gathering the full weight of her disgust, she spat the words that cut through Kevin more sharply than any blade could. "I refuse to stay in the same room as people like you and this imbecile child." The words landed like bricks. She spun on her heel, her designer heels clicking with finality as she left the room, leaving a silence thick with tension. Kevin, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, felt his blood boil. Rage, frustration, and an aching betrayal surged through him. He tore off his cap, revealing his identity, his eyes blazing with fury. In the drawing room, Kevin confronted Carol. The opulence of the space, the fine furniture, the sparkling crystal, all symbols of his life, felt alien, oppressive under the weight of this confrontation. "It's over," he said, voice measured but firm, every word resonating with the authority of a man finally standing for himself. Carol, however, did not flinch. She smiled, a cold, calculating curve of the lips, and from her designer bag she withdrew a folder. "I knew you were watching, Kevin," she said, her tone smooth, but underneath it a venomous certainty. "But if you leave me, I release these fabricated documents to the press. You'll lose the company, and I'll sue for full custody of Billy, claiming you're an unfit, absent father." Kevin's body stiffened. He froze, trapped in a moment of disbelief. He had been so certain that honesty and integrity could guide the path forward. Yet here was the ultimate manipulation, wielded by the person he had trusted most. Every muscle in his body tensed, but beneath it all, he felt the quiet stirrings of resolve. He knew the battle was just beginning, and that the man he was beneath the disguise, the man who had watched the injustice unfold, was not one to be defeated so easily. Joshua, now aware of Kevin's presence, glanced at the boy who had so bravely spoken up. He saw the fear mingled with courage in Billy's small frame, the hope of someone who needed protection and guidance. In that moment, an unspoken connection formed between Joshua, Kevin, and Billy, a bond forged not by wealth or status, but by the shared experience of standing against cruelty. The room, once heavy with tension, now trembled with the possibility of justice, of resilience, and of the quiet, unyielding strength that can arise when people refuse to bow to malice. The mansion, which had once been a sanctuary for Kevin, now felt like a gilded cage. Each corridor, every polished stair, reminded him of the twisted reversal of power. Carol had assumed full control, her presence dominating the air, and Kevin, the owner, moved like a silent shadow in his own home. To the outside world, he was the doting fiancé, smiling at her side during the rare visitors, attending to her whims with a strained patience. Each handshake, each nod, was a carefully measured performance, a mask to protect not just his son Billy, but the empire he had built from the ground up. Yet behind closed doors, the weight of the deception and humiliation pressed heavily on his chest, and loneliness gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Late that afternoon, Kevin retreated to the garage, a space once filled with the gleam of his collection of cars and the satisfaction of creation. Now, it was empty, cold, and smelled faintly of oil and rubber, a stark contrast to the tension choking the mansion. He slumped onto a low workbench, head in hands, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. The feeling of helplessness was foreign to him. Kevin was a man accustomed to control, accustomed to commanding respect. And yet, here he sat, trapped by manipulation, the threat of blackmail, and the fear of losing his son. Joshua, who had spent the day performing tasks around the mansion while being subjected to Carol's veiled and overt insults, noticed Kevin's absence. He approached cautiously, but not timidly. The man he had seen crumble into silence was the same man whose reputation had once inspired awe in boardrooms. A man whose kindness had always been understated but unmistakable. Joshua's voice broke the quiet, calm, but deliberate. "Mr. Kevin, I may just be the janitor, but I know when a good man is being cornered." Kevin looked up, his eyes glistening with the fatigue of someone caring more than any one person should. He expected judgment, the harsh rebuke of someone in his employ, yet Joshua's gaze was unwavering, steady. It was a look that spoke of understanding, of solidarity without pretense. Kevin swallowed hard, voice low but raw with frustration and fear. "Carol, she has everything set up, the blackmail, the threats. Billy, she's going to take everything from me if I step out of line. I can't fight her directly without risking it all." His hands shook slightly, betraying the tension he had carried so stoically. Joshua's lips pressed into a firm line, the fire of indignation bright in his eyes. He leaned forward, placing a hand on Kevin's shoulder, grounding him. "Evil thrives when good men do nothing," he said. "We won't let her win." The weight of his certainty was tangible, a quiet strength that made Kevin feel, for the first time in hours, that he was not alone. From the shadows of the garage, a small, hesitant voice spoke. "Dad, is she going to hurt us?" Billy's wide, terrified eyes peered from behind the corner of a car, the innocence of childhood colliding with the raw cruelty of the adult world. Kevin's chest tightened as he rose, pulling his son into his arms. Joshua knelt to Billy's level, his presence calm yet commanding. "I've got your back, little man," he said gently, voice soothing but strong. "We're going to fix this. You won't have to face her alone." The boy clung to him instinctively, the trust forming quickly, the bond sealing between the billionaire, the janitor, and the child. In that quiet, unassuming garage, a fragile family of 3 began to emerge, held together not by blood or wealth, but by loyalty, courage, and mutual care. Meanwhile, Carol's machinations continued without pause. She announced the grand gala with a flourish, a high society spectacle designed to solidify her image and control over Kevin's world. Invitations were sent, preparations underway, and Joshua was summoned for a particularly demeaning task. He was to be the bathroom attendant for the night, a role calculated to humiliate him in front of the city's elite. The words had been delivered with a cruel smile, the kind that could chill a man to the bone. Yet, Joshua accepted without a word, bowing slightly, the faintest shadow of anger in his posture, but never revealing weakness. Every step he took in service, every motion in preparation, was infused with the quiet strength of someone who refused to be broken. Late that night, the mansion fell into silence as most of the staff rested. Joshua moved through Carol's office, hands steady as he tidied, eyes scanning for anything of significance, for any hint of leverage or truth. The faint glow of the desk lamp illuminated a pile of shredded papers in the waste bin. A slow, methodical process began as he picked through the fragments, each piece revealing more than he expected. Carefully, he pieced together what appeared to be a medical report, contradicting Carol's tallies of a fragile pregnancy she had used to manipulate Kevin's conscience and gain his compliance. Joshua's heart quickened as he snapped a discreet photograph of the reconstructed report. The weight of this discovery pressed on him, not just as evidence, but as confirmation of Carol's deceit, of the cruel lengths she would go to bend others to her will. A chill ran through the office, and he sensed movement at the door. The handle began to turn slowly, a metallic click echoing in the silent room. Joshua froze, every nerve alert, the quiet tension between discovery and danger pulling taut in the air. He understood in that moment that the smallest misstep could undo everything they had begun to build: the trust, the hope, and the plan to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Every heartbeat echoed with the stakes at play. The fear was real, palpable, but so too was the resolve. Joshua knew that the coming hours would test not just his courage, but the bond forming between him, Kevin, and Billy, a bond that had already begun to transform despair into determination, anxiety into strategy, and helplessness into the quiet certainty that justice, dignity, and loyalty could prevail, even in the most gilded of cages. Joshua's pulse quickened as he pressed himself against the back wall of the small closet, the faint scent of cedar mingling with the polished wood. He could hear Carol's heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the empty office. The moment was tense, electric with anticipation and fear, yet he remained perfectly still. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the door, every muscle taut with alertness, every thought racing to calculate risk. He knew that any wrong move could expose him, undoing the fragile progress he, Kevin, and Billy had begun to make toward reclaiming control of the household. The door opened just enough for Carol to step inside, her designer heels clicking against the office floor. She held her phone to her ear, her voice betraying the careful, cultivated accent she used in public. Now, in private, it dropped to a natural, raw tone, tinged with both urgency and triumph. "The idiot believes the blackmail," she said, and Joshua's stomach tightened at the venom in her words. "Once we get married next month, I'll sign the power of attorney over to you. We drain the accounts and leave him with the debt." Every word carved itself into Joshua's mind with a sharp clarity. The carefully constructed facade of Carol as a gold-digging socialite shattered in an instant, revealing the ruthless and calculated woman beneath. This was no mere manipulation for attention or luxury. It was a meticulously planned corporate heist. Joshua's heart raced, but so did his clarity. The magnitude of the betrayal pressed on him, a heavy weight that galvanized every fiber of his being. Carol wasn't just pretending for attention or affection. She was committing fraud, plotting to strip Kevin of his hard-earned company and leave him broken. The thought made Joshua's jaw clench, his blood boiling with indignation. He slid silently along the wall, inching further into the shadows of the closet, making sure to remain unseen. Every second brought him closer to understanding the depths of their deception. He memorized the patterns of her speech, the subtle pauses, the inflections that revealed her impatience and contempt for Kevin, whom she deemed ignorant and weak. Joshua's mind raced with the enormity of the plan. She had Marcus, someone with intimate access to Kevin's finances, and together they intended to orchestrate a theft so sophisticated that few would suspect a thing until it was too late. The next morning, Joshua found Kevin sitting at the breakfast table, staring blankly at the untouched plate of eggs before him. His eyes were shadowed with worry, his usually upright posture slumped under the weight of the night's revelations. Joshua approached cautiously, still absorbing the enormity of what he had learned. "Kevin," he said softly, voice low but steady, "I need to tell you what I overheard last night." Kevin looked up, his eyes meeting Joshua's. At first, there was skepticism, a guarded wariness born of necessity. But Joshua's expression, the unflinching certainty and controlled urgency, shattered that doubt. "It's Carol," Joshua continued. "It's more than manipulation. She's planning a heist. And Marcus, he's involved." Kevin's eyes widened, the initial shock painting his face pale. His mouth opened, then closed, words failing him as the realization sank in. Joshua took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I've got the proof," he said. "We can't just end the engagement. We have to catch them in the act. If we expose them now, they'll cover their tracks and we'll lose everything." Kevin's hands clenched into fists under the table. The hopelessness of yesterday was replaced now by a surge of adrenaline and determination. His mind raced, plotting the steps they would need to take, but he leaned back slightly, trusting Joshua implicitly. They devised a meticulous plan. Kevin would maintain the facade of the submissive fiancé, hiding the storm of betrayal and anger within, while Joshua, exploiting his invisible status as a black servant whom Carol habitually ignored, would gather evidence from within. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every movement would be monitored. Billy, perceptive beyond his years, became an unlikely accomplice. With subtle cues and strategic mischief, he would act bratty at the most opportune moments, distracting Carol long enough for Joshua to plant listening devices and capture crucial evidence. For hours, days even, the mansion became a stage for their covert operation. Kevin smiled when required, his jaw tight with restraint, every gesture calculated to avoid suspicion. Joshua moved silently and deliberately, invisible yet omnipresent, absorbing details others would overlook. The tilt of Carol's head as she spoke to Marcus on the phone, the careless flick of her wrist as she signed documents, the cadence of her laughter when she believed herself unobserved. Every subtlety became a piece of the puzzle, a small thread in the web of proof they were weaving. Late one evening, they reviewed the collected recordings. Joshua's hands trembled slightly as he listened, aware of the stakes with every word captured. And then, there it was, Marcus's voice, unmistakable and familiar. Kevin's face turned ashen as he leaned closer to the speaker, disbelief and shock etching deep lines in his expression. "That's not a stranger," he whispered, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and rage. "Marcus, that's my own chief financial officer." The revelation hung in the room, dense and suffocating, yet it ignited a fire within them. The betrayal was personal, intimate, cutting deeper than they could have imagined. But alongside the shock came resolve. They knew what had to be done. Patience, precision, and courage would be their allies. They would confront the treachery not with impulsive fury, but with strategy, wit, and unwavering moral certainty. And through it all, the bond between Kevin, Joshua, and Billy deepened, forged in adversity, strengthened by shared purpose, and anchored in the knowledge that even in the most harrowing betrayal, loyalty, love, and courage could guide the way to justice. The mansion no longer merely felt tense, it felt volatile, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Carol's stress had sharpened into something corrosive, leaking into every room she entered. Her smile had become brittle, her patience non-existent. The smallest inconveniences ignited her temper, and the household learned quickly to move quietly, to exist without being noticed. Even Kevin felt the weight of it, watching helplessly as the woman who claimed to love him unraveled into someone cruel and unpredictable. That afternoon, Carol stormed down the main hallway, her heels striking the floor with sharp, angry precision. Her eyes caught on something small lying near the base of the wall, a worn action figure, its paint chipped, one arm loose from years of love, Billy's toy. Without hesitation, she bent down, picked it up, and tossed it into the trash bin with a dismissive flick of her wrist, as though discarding something filthy. Billy appeared moments later, his face lighting up briefly before confusion set in. His eyes darted from the empty spot on the floor to the trash bin, realization dawning slowly, painfully. He rushed forward, pulling the toy from the bin, his hands shaking. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice breaking. "That was mine." The sound of his crying echoed softly through the hall, fragile and raw. Carol turned toward him, her expression hardening. "Stop that noise!" she snapped. When he didn't, when his sobs only grew louder, something dark flashed across her face. Her hand lifted, fingers tense, palm open, anger fully unleashed. The slap never landed. A strong hand closed around her wrist mid-air, stopping the motion with absolute certainty. The sudden stillness was shocking. Carol gasped, her breath catching as she turned to see who dared touch her. It was Joshua. The man standing before her bore little resemblance to the quiet janitor she had dismissed and degraded for months. His posture was straight, his presence commanding. There was no hesitation in him now, no lowered gaze or careful politeness. His eyes burned with a fierce, protective intensity as he placed himself fully between Carol and Billy, his body a shield. "You will not touch him," Joshua said, his voice low, steady, and edged with something unmistakably dangerous. "Not while I breathe." Carol tried to wrench her arm free, but she couldn't. His grip wasn't violent, it was controlled, deliberate, but unyielding. For the first time, fear crept into her eyes, real and unfiltered. She wasn't facing a servant anymore. She was facing a man who had drawn a line and dared her to cross it. "Let go of me," she shrieked, panic sharpening her voice. "Security. He assaulted me." The commotion drew Kevin running from the adjacent room. He took in the scene instantly. Billy shaking behind Joshua, tears streaking his face, Carol twisting in fury. Joshua standing firm, his body tense but controlled. Carol spun toward Kevin, rage and humiliation contorting her features. "Have him arrested!" she demanded. "He attacked me!" Kevin's gaze moved to the security guards gathering at the end of the hallway. Then, back to Carol. His expression was calm, but something final had settled into his eyes. "The cameras were down for maintenance, Carol," he said evenly. "It's your word against his." He paused, his voice lowering, steady with conviction. "And I believe the man who protects my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Carol stared at him, disbelief giving way to seething hatred. Her authority had cracked just slightly, but enough to expose the truth beneath. She yanked her arm free at last, stepping back, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her gaze locked onto Joshua, sharp and venomous. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice barely audible, meant only for him. She leaned closer, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Enjoy your freedom tonight, Janitor. Tomorrow I'll plant something in your locker that will send you to prison for years." Joshua didn't flinch. He simply met her stare, unwavering. Fear had no place left in him now, only resolve. Behind him, Billy reached out and clutched the back of Joshua's jacket, small fingers gripping tightly as though anchoring himself to something solid in a world that suddenly felt dangerous and unpredictable. Joshua felt the touch and softened just slightly, his stance still firm, but his presence gentler, reassuring. Kevin watched the two of them, something shifting deep inside his chest. In that moment, he understood that Joshua was no longer just protecting his son. He was protecting what little innocence Billy still had left. And that realization filled Kevin not with fear, but with gratitude and something close to hope. Carol turned and walked away, her shoulders stiff, her pride wounded, but her threat unmistakably real. The gala loomed closer now, no longer just a celebration, but a battlefield waiting to be claimed. And in the quiet that followed, as Billy's sobs faded and Joshua finally released the breath he'd been holding, one truth became clear. The beast Carol believed she controlled had awakened, and it stood firmly between her and the child she would never harm again. The night of the gala arrived like a storm of elegance and tension. The mansion, now illuminated by 1,000 twinkling lights, radiated wealth and sophistication, yet beneath the polished floors and gilded chandeliers, an invisible war was about to unfold. Kevin moved through the grand entryway with a practiced smile, his posture perfect, but his stomach churned with unease. Every laugh, every handshake, every nod felt like a carefully measured performance, each movement hiding the anxiety that tightened around his chest. To the guests, he was the doting fiancé, the successful and charming future husband of a woman they admired for her poise and beauty. In truth, he was a man walking on a razor's edge, every moment a test of restraint, every interaction a battle to protect his son and the company he had built with his own hands. Carol appeared at the top of the grand staircase, breathtaking in a white gown that hugged her figure and shimmered under the light of the chandeliers. She descended slowly, smiling graciously, embodying the role of the benevolent stepmother with effortless ease. Her eyes, however, betrayed a simmering intensity, an impatience and hunger for control masked by elegance. Behind her, Kevin watched carefully, noting every subtle flicker of her expression, every tiny twitch of her hand, knowing that beneath that poised exterior was a woman desperate to dominate every facet of the night. Joshua had been assigned his position by Carol, stationed near the restrooms in a uniform that was ill-fitting, almost comically so, intended to demean him in front of the city's elite. The fabric hung awkwardly, the sleeves too long, the cap too tight, but he bore it with quiet dignity. His posture remained impeccable, his eyes scanning the room without drawing attention, yet every fiber of his being radiated control and purpose. He moved like a shadow, present but unseen. A silent guardian watching over Kevin and Billy, prepared to act when the moment arrived. The first arrivals were a mix of socialites and business magnates, each carrying their own airs of importance and self-assurance. Marcus, the CFO, strode into the ballroom with a confident smile, his polished shoes echoing on the marble. He approached Kevin, extending his hand with the practiced ease of someone who knew his place in the hierarchy. "Great night for the company, Kevin," he said smoothly. The betrayal behind the words cut deeper than a blade. Marcus was not just complicit. He was a trusted partner, the man whose loyalty Kevin had assumed, now revealed as a conspirator. Kevin's throat tightened, but he returned the smile with the precision of someone performing a role, nodding slightly, eyes cold but controlled. Joshua, watching from his post, caught Kevin's gaze and offered a subtle nod, the silent signal that the trap was in motion. Every guest was unaware, oblivious to the unfolding battle behind the veneer of civility. The plan was simple in theory, but relied entirely on timing and precision. They needed Carol to reveal her phone, to unlock the private device that contained the final transfer codes, the key to exposing the conspiracy and reclaiming control. Billy, sensing the tension in the room yet eager to help, positioned himself strategically. He appeared to wander clumsily near the refreshment table, eyes wide with feigned innocence. When Carol turned her attention to other guests, he acted with impeccable timing, deliberately knocking over the punch bowl. Crimson liquid arced through the air, landing squarely on Carol's pristine white gown. A gasp rippled through the crowd, an audible shock that made even the most composed guests pause. Carol's reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Her face contorted with rage, eyes flashing with fury. She spun toward Joshua, who was nearby, and spat a racial slur, the venom in her words slicing through the murmurs of the startled guests. Then her gaze fell on Billy, and you useless mistake, she screamed, her voice echoing in the grand hall. Silence followed, thick and heavy, as the room collectively held its breath. Yet, almost imperceptibly, she recalibrated, forcing her face into a mask of composure and whispering to herself about stress and accidents, attempting to regain the appearance of control and innocence. In a swift motion, she ran toward the back of the mansion, ostensibly to change her gown. Her fingers immediately went to her phone, unlocking it with the speed of a practiced hand. Every step she took was calculated, every movement a part of her plan to regain dominance. But Joshua was already ahead of her, intercepting her in the hallway. She expected to be confronted by towels, by staff, by some minor inconvenience, but Joshua was different. He held not cleaning supplies, but a tablet, connected to the ballroom's main screen, its subtle glow illuminating his determined face. "Your dress is the least of your worries, Carol," he said calmly, his voice measured, unwavering. quiet storm beneath the composed exterior. There was no threat in his tone, yet every word carried the weight of inevitability, a controlled power that left her momentarily frozen. Carol's initial reaction was a startled laugh, a brittle attempt at deflection. Her fingers moved instinctively, preparing to call security, to summon help and reclaim her authority. Unbeknownst to her, this was precisely what Joshua and Kevin had been waiting for. Her movements triggered the final phase of their plan, a step that would soon reveal the truth to everyone in the room. Behind her, the mansion held its breath. The chandeliers shimmered, the guests remained unaware, and the fragile balance of civility teetered on the edge of revelation. For the first time that evening, Carol was no longer in control. The night had shifted, the pieces had fallen into place, and the unseen forces working for justice, for protection, and for dignity were ready to move. In the silent exchange between Joshua and Carol, a quiet understanding passed. One was poised to reclaim integrity, the other teetered on the brink of exposure. And through it all, Billy watched from a safe distance, his eyes wide, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding, unaware that his small, calculated role had been essential to bringing the truth into the light. The gala, which had begun as a display of wealth, power, and illusion, had now become a stage for justice, courage, and revelation. Every smile, every gasp, every whispered word in the room contributed to the tension that would soon snap, leaving the household and the lives within it forever changed. The soft hum of the hidden scanner in Joshua's pocket was the only sound accompanying the tension that hung in the mansion's hallways. Carol's fingers danced over her phone with quick, precise movements, entering the code that she believed would secure her final victory. Each tap was a drumbeat of triumph in her mind, a signal that her meticulous plan was finally reaching fruition. She glanced at Marcus, his expression calm but expectant, knowing that in a few moments they would possess the keys to Kevin's fortune. What she didn't know was that Joshua's careful preparation had captured every input. His eyes, alert and focused, followed her fingers as they moved, memorizing the sequence, the rhythm, the subtle hesitations. The scanner quietly transmitted the data, invisible and undetectable, until it reached Kevin's phone across the mansion. A gentle buzz confirmed the signal had arrived. Kevin's hand trembled slightly as he held the device, adrenaline and anticipation coursing through his veins. He felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever, knowing that every second of delay could give Carol the advantage again. In the ballroom, the murmurs of the guests created a subtle, almost hypnotic background noise. Kevin moved to the stage, his public composure intact despite the storm of emotions roiling beneath his calm exterior. He looked out at the faces of the elite, each one expectant, curious, unknowingly witnessing the turning point of an unfolding drama far more consequential than they realized. He raised his glass, the crystal catching the light, a signal that the moment had arrived. "Tonight," he began, his voice firm, yet imbued with sincerity, "is about revealing the true face of this family." His words cut through the hum of polite conversation, drawing attention as all eyes shifted toward him. Carol, ever the actress, immediately composed herself. She smoothed the fabric of her dress, pulled back her shoulders, and returned a practiced smile. Marcus stood next to her, nodding slightly, the perfect image of success and control. Carol expected admiration, a toast to her cleverness, the public recognition of her cunning. The moment she had imagined for months was at hand, and she intended to shine in it. But the grand screen behind the stage, the one designed to display a montage celebrating the couple, flickered unexpectedly. And then it changed entirely. A new image replaced the celebration, a live feed of a bank transfer. Kevin's personal account was displayed for all to see, the numbers moving rapidly across the screen. Gasps rose from the crowd as they realized the funds weren't disappearing into Carol's accounts. Instead, the money was flowing into an account registered as a charitable foundation in Carol's name, but orchestrated by Kevin and Joshua. The revelation hit Carol like a physical blow. Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen, disbelief mingling with panic. This wasn't just a thwarted theft, it was a reversal. The enormous sums she had intended to siphon away were being donated, effectively bankrupting her hidden accounts, an act of poetic justice that exposed her greed without harming anyone else. The air in the ballroom grew thick with tension, the guests whispering in shock as the magnitude of the moment sank in. "What have you done?" Carol screeched, her voice raw with fear and rage. She moved toward Kevin, hands trembling, mouth opening and closing as if trying to find a way to reclaim control. Her carefully cultivated composure had vanished, leaving only the stark human reality of being outmaneuvered. Kevin smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that carried no malice, only a sense of calm inevitability. "I'm just doing what you asked, darling," he said, his tone deliberately casual, masking the depth of strategy and intelligence behind the action. "Giving back." The words dripped with irony, highlighting the poetic reversal of her intentions while revealing his capacity to remain humane even in confrontation. Carol's mind raced. There had to be a backup, a final lever, a last desperate attempt to regain control. Her fingers darted into her designer bag, retrieving the infamous blackmail folder she had used to intimidate Kevin. The evidence she believed would force compliance. With a flourish, she waved it toward the press and the guests, a desperate attempt to salvage her dignity and manipulate perception. "He's a criminal! Look at this!" she cried, voice trembling, the first cracks of panic piercing the practiced veneer she had worn for so long. The room's atmosphere shifted immediately. Photographers clicked furiously, their flashes illuminating Carol's white dress and the trembling folder, capturing the drama for posterity. Murmurs rose, questions whispered, but beneath the noise, a quiet scrutiny began to form. Guests who had previously admired her poise now studied her fear, the tension in her shoulders, the subtle quiver in her voice. The performance she had perfected for months faltered under the weight of the moment. And the truth, the audacity and precision of Kevin and Joshua's planning emerged like a lighthouse in a storm. Kevin stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his gaze steady on the crowd, then on Carol. The words he spoke next were measured, deliberate, but carried the full force of authority. "Everything you see tonight," he said, voice resonant, "is the result of greed confronted with integrity. And it is not I who acts alone. There are those who stand with us, quietly, steadfastly, protecting what is right." His eyes flicked to Joshua, standing firm in the shadows near the hall, the unsung hero whose diligence and moral courage had made this moment possible. For the first time, Carol realized the full scale of the miscalculation. The money was gone, her plans reversed, and her attempts at intimidation rendered impotent. And yet, even in defeat, there was one final human element: the confrontation of intent with consequence. The twist wasn't merely financial, it was moral. It exposed the hollowness of her manipulations, while highlighting the integrity, patience, and subtle genius of those she had sought to control. Joshua, observing from the periphery, allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to form. The plan had worked. The silent vigilance, the careful orchestration, the patience and courage, all of it had led to this moment of revelation. And for Kevin and Billy, the lesson was equally profound. Justice could be served not through brute force or vengeance, but through strategy, calm, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. Carol's shrieks echoed faintly in the hall, fading beneath the rising chorus of whispered admiration and awe. In that moment, the true power of dignity, courage, and moral clarity was revealed, not as a display of wealth or social rank, but as an unassailable, quiet strength that could withstand even the most ruthless schemes. The ballroom felt electrified, the air thick with anticipation and disbelief. Guests, previously caught in the glamour of the gala, now formed a living ring around the central confrontation, their murmurs blending into a low, almost palpable hum of curiosity and tension. Camera flashes erupted rhythmically, each burst illuminating the anxious, shocked, or judgmental faces of the elite, capturing not only the spectacle, but the raw emotions of a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The social veneer had been stripped away, leaving the raw interplay of power, morality, and human vulnerability on stark display. Joshua stepped deliberately into the center of the ballroom, his movements calm yet authoritative. The janitor's uniform hung awkwardly on his frame, sleeves slightly long, buttons pulling against his chest, cap perched stiffly on his head. Yet the uniform could not conceal the presence he commanded, the quiet authority that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. His posture was perfect, shoulders squared, jaw firm, and eyes unflinching. The room instinctively recognized the shift in energy, the subtle tension that spoke of a man who was in control, not through title or wealth, but through the sheer force of moral certainty and preparedness. "Open the folder, ma'am," Joshua said, his voice low, measured, yet carrying an unambiguous weight that drew all attention to him. It was a challenge and a promise, an invitation to reveal truth and consequences alike. Every syllable resonated across the polished floors, the echo catching the ears of guest and press, ensuring there was no escape from the confrontation. The words hung in the air, thick and unavoidable, like a storm about to break. Carol, sensing both defiance and inevitability, lifted the folder with a smug, practiced air. She exuded confidence, though a subtle tremor in her fingers betrayed the first cracks in her carefully constructed composure. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the folder for all to see, expecting the documents inside to reaffirm her power and control. Instead, the pages were blank. A collective gasp rose from the surrounding crowd, the sound a mixture of disbelief, shock, and the first glimmers of triumph for those witnessing justice quietly unfold. The realization struck Carol with visceral force. Days ago, Joshua had executed a meticulous plan, swapping the documents in her safe under the guise of routine cleaning. He had done so with precision, moving silently through the mansion when no one noticed. Each action calculated to ensure that the contents she wielded as leverage would be powerless in the decisive moment. The very materials she believed would intimidate, manipulate, and control Kevin were now rendered null evidence of cunning matched by integrity and courage. "You're a janitor," Carol screamed, her voice cracking, a mixture of anger and disbelief, laced with humiliation. "You're nobody." The words came sharp, almost brittle, a final attempt to assert dominance, to intimidate a man whose social position she considered inferior. She expected fear, retreat, maybe even public embarrassment. Instead, she was met with calm, controlled authority that left her visibly shaken. "I am the man who cleans up the trash," Joshua said, his voice steady, each word deliberate, dignified, "and tonight, I'm working overtime." There was no arrogance, only truth. The room felt the weight of the statement, the quiet dignity inherent in a man who had sacrificed comfort, status, and recognition to stand for justice, to protect the innocent and confront wrongdoing. It was a testament to resilience and the uncelebrated heroism that often goes unseen until the moment when it matters most. Kevin, seizing the moment, moved to the stage and lifted the microphone with a practiced ease, voice projecting clearly across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, calm yet commanding, "allow me to introduce the real content." The words carried both authority and empathy, an acknowledgement of the audience's curiosity, and an unwavering focus on the moral lesson unfolding before them. He paused for effect, allowing the tension to build, the air thick with anticipation, before pressing play on the audio device connected to the ballroom sound system. The voices of Carol and Marcus filled the hall, sharp and unmistakable. Every nuance, every inflection revealed not only the plan they had plotted, but the contempt they had held for those around them. The guests heard them discussing accounts to be drained, manipulation to be executed, and the precise methods by which Kevin's fortune was to be usurped. The audio exposed their cold calculations, their disregard for law and ethics, and, most poignantly, the callous disregard for human dignity, especially toward those they considered beneath them. The insults toward the donors, spoken with sneering amusement, only heightened the sense of betrayal, making the revelation not merely legal, but deeply personal, exposing the moral rot beneath the polished surface. Marcus, realizing the full scope of exposure and betrayal, attempted to flee. His movement was sudden, panicked, a stark contrast to the composed, deliberate actions of Joshua and Kevin. Yet every exit had been anticipated. Security personnel, now guided with precision by Joshua, moved swiftly to block every route. Guests parted instinctively, giving a wide berth, and the chase was short but decisive. Marcus's face drained of color, his panic undeniable as he was contained and restrained. The quiet efficiency of the intervention underscored Joshua's mastery of timing and strategy, revealing the depth of preparation behind the night's events. Carol's expression shifted again from shock to fury, then disbelief, the progression raw and human. She realized that control, power, and manipulation had all slipped from her grasp, leaving only the undeniable exposure of her deeds. The silent authority of Joshua, the strategic brilliance of Kevin, and the collective awareness of the ballroom's witnesses converged into a moment of moral clarity. It was more than a victory. It was a revelation of integrity, courage, and the understated strength that can exist in the humblest of individuals. The crowd, initially stunned, began to respond with quiet applause, murmurs of admiration and relief rippling through the guests. The realization that right had prevailed without overt violence or spectacle, through cunning, courage, and steadfastness, settled over the room like a comforting warmth. For Joshua, it was a recognition not of title or social standing, but of the human capacity for honor and justice. For Kevin, it was the moment where protective love and strategic patience had been vindicated. And for the guests, the lesson was unforgettable. Appearances may deceive, but truth and integrity endure. The tension in the ballroom had reached a fever pitch, a volatile mix of shock, disbelief, and the faint pulse of adrenaline that rippled through every guest. The confrontation had stripped away the polished facades of wealth and status, exposing raw human emotion in its most intense form. Carol, cornered and fully aware that her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, felt the surge of desperation rise like a tidal wave. Her breaths were shallow, rapid, each one a small admission of panic she could not disguise. The room seemed to shrink around her, the circle of witnesses tightening, their eyes sharp, watching her every move with anticipation. In that moment, instinct overtook reason. Carol's fingers clamped around a steak knife she had snatched from a nearby hors d'oeuvres table, the metallic gleam catching the harsh ballroom lights. Her choice of target was instinctive. She knew she could not reach Kevin, who stood protected by distance and strategy. The boy, Billy, small and innocent, was exposed, his vulnerability magnifying her rage. The knife's tip gleamed like a twisted metaphor for her unraveling, and in her mind, striking Billy was a way to hurt Kevin in the deepest, most personal way possible. The lunge was sudden, violent, and instinctive. Gasps erupted from the crowd, screams of shock punctuating the atmosphere like alarm bells. A hush followed, punctuated only by the sound of heels skidding against the polished marble and the quiet, collective intake of breath as the room realized the immediacy of danger. Kevin froze for the briefest moment, the distance between him and his son rendering him helpless in the most unbearable way. His mind raced, a torrent of fear, frustration, and protective instinct crashing against the limits of the situation. Then, from the edge of the chaos, Joshua moved. Every eye turned to him as if drawn by an invisible force. His movement defied age, expectation, and the limitations that appearances suggested. The janitor uniform, torn and ill-fitting, belied the presence of a man honed by discipline, intellect, and courage. Time seemed to slow for those witnessing him pivot and intercept the threat. He threw himself in front of Billy, the boy's small frame trembling against him, eyes wide with terror and trust intermingled. The knife connected not with the intended target but with Joshua's arm. The fabric of his uniform tore, a crimson line blossoming across the sleeve as the blade sliced into flesh. The sight of blood drew a collective gasp from the room, the gravity of the danger crystallizing in the hearts of every onlooker. But Joshua did not falter. Pain flared through his arm, sharp and insistent, yet he ignored it, his focus singular: protect the child, neutralize the threat. In a series of swift, practiced movements, he disarmed Carol, twisting the knife from her grip with precision that spoke of both physical training and tactical awareness. The momentum carried him into a pin, pressing Carol to the ground with a controlled force that left no room for resistance. His voice, low and steady, despite the blood dripping from his arm, carried a weight that demanded acknowledgement. "It's over," he said, words resonant with finality. There was no malice, no unnecessary cruelty, just the unassailable authority of a man who had stood in the breach to protect the innocent. He looked not like a servant, as Carol had so arrogantly assumed, but like a warrior, disciplined, unwavering, and morally indomitable. The guests, initially frozen in disbelief, found themselves awash in a mixture of awe and relief, witnessing courage personified in its most human form. The police, who had been stationed discreetly but vigilantly throughout the evening, rushed into the ballroom at that moment. Their presence, immediate and reassuring, added the weight of law and order to the unfolding climax. Carol's eyes, wide with fury and disbelief, met Joshua's with pure hatred. "You're just the help," she spat, her voice trembling with venom, rage, and the bitter realization of defeat. But the words landed hollowly. Powerless against the authority and moral clarity that radiated from Joshua, a presence far greater than any title or social position could confer. Kevin knelt beside Joshua, the sight of his friend and protector bleeding from the arm wrenching a profound mix of gratitude, guilt, and admiration from him. He looked into Joshua's eyes, feeling the depth of sacrifice and courage on display, and his voice rang out loud and clear, carrying the weight of acknowledgement for all in the room to hear. "No," he declared firmly, his tone resolute and unshakable. "He is the head of this household." The words were more than symbolic. They were a declaration of respect, trust, and recognition of valor, a moral verdict louder than any legal title could convey. Joshua, despite the pain and blood coursing down his arm, allowed a faint, reassuring smile to reach Billy's eyes. The boy clung tightly to his hand, unwilling to release the bond formed in the crucible of danger. Tears streaked Billy's face, unfiltered and pure, a blend of fear, relief, and profound attachment. "I'm okay, little man," Joshua whispered gently, the edges of his voice tender despite its firmness. "Just a scratch." Each word was meant to soothe, to restore a sense of safety, to anchor the child amidst the chaos and trauma of the moment. The ambulance doors closed on the scene, carrying Joshua away while the murmurs of the crowd swelled into a quiet, almost reverent applause. The spectacle of violence had passed, leaving in its wake a tableau of courage, human connection, an unwavering dedication to the protection of the innocent. Kevin remained close, holding Billy, feeling the weight of gratitude and the depth of moral victory in Joshua's sacrifice. The child's hand remained wrapped around Joshua's even as the paramedics tended to him, a tangible symbol of trust, loyalty, and the profound bonds forged through acts of courage. The room, once filled with social pretense, was now a testament to the quiet, enduring power of integrity, the courage to act when others falter, and the resilience of the human spirit under threat. Every witness felt the resonance of the moment, the undeniable lesson that heroism is not measured by status or wealth, but by the courage to stand in the line of danger to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And as the ambulance pulled away, a hush fell over the ballroom, a quiet acknowledgement that the night had changed lives, revealing the profound truth that character and bravery could triumph over cruelty, manipulation, and fear. The mansion was bathed in an almost sacred quiet. A week had passed since the chaos of the gala, the confrontation, and the violent outburst that had left Joshua injured but unbroken. The air felt lighter, untainted by tension, as if the walls themselves had exhaled a sigh of relief. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the main hall, dust motes dancing lazily in the golden streams, illuminating every polished surface with a gentle, forgiving light. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere that had once defined the home under Carol's manipulations, a home that had now become a sanctuary of calm and reflection. Joshua approached the front entrance, arm still in a sling, the fabric of his uniform stained faintly where the wound had bled through. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, aware of the lingering ache that throbbed in his arm and chest, a reminder of the courage and risk he had shouldered for the protection of a child and the pursuit of justice. He expected, at least in some quiet part of his mind, that the mansion would feel empty, hostile even, that the staff, still under shock from recent events, might look at him with judgment or pity, and that the drama of the past week had rendered his place here unnecessary. But as he entered the main hall, Joshua's assumptions shattered. Lined up along the walls, all the staff maids, cooks, groundskeepers, and attendants clapped. Their expressions were a mixture of relief, admiration, and gratitude, eyes shining with a newfound respect. Some had tears in their eyes, discreet but undeniable, as if acknowledging not only his heroism, but also the humanity he had preserved under unimaginable pressure. Joshua stopped short, his breath catching, overwhelmed by the subtle yet profound recognition of all he had silently fought for. Kevin stood near the center, a wry smile playing on his lips. Billy clung to his father's side, his small hand resting protectively on Kevin's arm, eyes wide with a mix of excitement and affection for the man who had risked everything to safeguard him. In Kevin's hand was a legal document, casually held but heavy with significance. With a glint of humor that did little to mask his admiration, Kevin addressed Joshua. "I fired the driver," he said, a sly smile tugging at his lips, "and I fired the janitor." Joshua's heart sank slightly, confusion and instinctive deference kicking in. "I understand, sir," he murmured, the weight of humility in his voice betraying the lingering doubts about his place in the world, even after everything he had risked and accomplished. Kevin's eyes softened, a warmth that contrasted with the formalities of their previous interactions. "Stop calling me sir," he said, the humor in his tone now laced with genuine respect and camaraderie. He stepped closer, his gaze locking with Joshua's, conveying the depth of the truth behind his words. "I've fired you because you're overqualified." Joshua blinked, the words hitting him with the force of revelation. Confusion and surprise flickered across his features. He had never sought recognition, had never fought for accolades or praise. He had sacrificed personal ambition for duty, for family, for the small comforts of a life devoted to care and quiet heroism. Yet Kevin's words acknowledged something he had not dared to hope for, a validation not just of skill, but of character. Kevin continued, his voice rich with both pride and a sense of justice fulfilled. "The charity that Carol's money was transferred to it wasn't random. Joshua's brow furrowed, curiosity and anticipation mingling with cautious hope. Kevin's gaze was steady, unwavering. It was a defunct community center in your old neighborhood, Joshua. The one that shut down because it lacked funding. I know how much that place meant to you, and how much it still can mean. The revelation settled over Joshua like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. His mind raced with memories. The dusty halls of the center, the laughter of children now long gone from its rooms. The sense of purpose and connection he had felt while volunteering there before life had demanded he prioritize survival and family over ambition. He had dreamed quietly of revitalizing the center, but had long accepted that it was beyond his reach. Now, the dream was tangible, restored, and waiting. Kevin handed him the keys, the metal cool and heavy in Joshua's hands, symbolizing not just access, but trust, responsibility, and opportunity. I need a CEO to run it, Kevin said, the words deliberate, each syllable carrying weight and expectation. And Billy needs his godfather to stay close. There was no pressure, only faith, a recognition of Joshua's abilities and the depth of his integrity. Joshua's chest tightened, emotions colliding in a wave of relief, gratitude, and profound validation. The trauma, the sacrifices, the pain, and the loyalty, all of it had culminated in a moment of undeniable triumph. Not just for him, but for the community that would soon thrive under his guidance. Tears blurred his vision, but he allowed himself to feel the weight and beauty of the moment fully. He looked at Billy, whose face mirrored wonder and respect, and at Kevin, whose acknowledgement bridged the gap between social divide and human truth. The staff continued to clap, softly now, their applause no longer celebratory, but reverent. Acknowledging the quiet heroism that often goes unseen in the fabric of everyday life. Joshua felt the warmth of connection, the sense that he was part of something larger, that his sacrifices had yielded not just protection, but restoration. The mansion, once a place of tension and fear, now exuded hope, possibility, and renewal. Joshua looked down at the keys again, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity. He smiled, faint but sincere, turning to Kevin and Billy. I don't know what to say, he stammered, emotions threatening to overwhelm the carefully constructed composure that had carried him through so many trials. Billy, his small face beaming, tugged on Joshua's arm, breaking the tension with innocence and unfiltered joy. Say yes, he whispered, his voice light but insistent, brimming with trust and expectation. The simple words carried profound meaning, sealing the bond of loyalty, protection, and newfound family. Joshua took a deep breath, allowing himself to fully embrace the moment. The past week, the fear, the violence, the strategy, the pain, had all led to this singular act of restoration. The mansion, the staff, Kevin, and Billy bore witness not only to his courage, but to the quiet truth that dignity, compassion, and steadfastness could reshape lives. He nodded, turning the key in his hand, and for the first time in years allowed himself to envision a future brimming with purpose, community, and connection. The day's sun streamed fully into the hall, highlighting dust motes dancing in the light. The warmth of a new beginning filling every corner of the room. In that moment, Joshua understood that heroism was never about recognition, wealth, or status. It was about the courage to act with integrity, the willingness to sacrifice for others, and the grace to build something enduring from the ashes of struggle. And in that quiet, sunlit hall, amidst the smiles and gratitude of those who had witnessed his journey, he felt the true weight and beauty of triumph, redemption, and purpose. Joshua stood frozen in the main hall, the weight of the keys heavy in his hand, the warm afternoon sunlight spilling across the polished floors and highlighting every faint scar, every line of exhaustion that had accumulated over years of silent perseverance. Tears streamed down his face unbidden, tracing paths along his cheeks as if to remind him that all the quiet suffering, the sacrifices, the patience and vigilance had not been in vain. The air around him felt charged with possibility, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for his decision, waiting for the acknowledgement of the new chapter that lay ahead. He looked at Billy, the boy whose wide eyes had witnessed so much, whose trust and faith had never wavered even when the world seemed unfair and cruel. Billy's small hand reached for his, squeezing it gently yet firmly, a silent declaration of loyalty and hope. "I don't know what to say," Joshua stammered, his voice breaking under the weight of emotion. He had spent decades tending to the needs of others, ensuring their safety, protecting them from harm, and in this moment, he realized that someone had cared enough to return that faith in him tenfold. "Say yes," Billy said, his face lighting up with a radiant, innocent joy that pierced through the residual fatigue and pain. He hugged Joshua tightly, wrapping his small arms around him as if to anchor him in this moment, to ensure that he felt the truth of his own worth reflected back at him. Joshua held the boy close, letting the tears flow freely now, his heart swelling with a combination of relief, gratitude, and profound happiness. Every fear he had carried, every doubt about his place in the world, melted away in the warmth of that embrace. Kevin stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Joshua's shoulder, his expression a mixture of pride and camaraderie. "Billy isn't the only one who believes in you, Joshua," he said softly. "We all do. And now it's time to give the world a glimpse of the man we've always known you to be." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of recognition, validation, and trust, a trifecta of acknowledgement that Joshua had long yearned for but never expected to receive. The story of their lives in the mansion began to unfold in a montage of quiet victories and new beginnings. The community center, once abandoned and dilapidated, now thrummed with life. Laughter and shouts of children filled the air as Joshua walked through sunlit hallways, guiding them through lessons, organizing activities, and sharing his wisdom. The paint on the walls gleamed, fresh and vibrant, reflecting the renewed hope of a neighborhood that had been forgotten. Teachers, volunteers, and children alike smiled, grateful for the chance to experience something meaningful and safe. Joshua's leadership was gentle but firm, his compassion evident in every word, every instruction, and every patient correction. Meanwhile, the world outside witnessed the consequences of Carol's actions. She sat in a sterile, cold prison cell, her designer clothing replaced with institutional gray. Her expression was a mask of disbelief and anger as she watched a news broadcast that showcased Joshua receiving the Man of the Year award for his courage, integrity, and selfless dedication to his community. The irony of the moment was not lost on anyone who saw it. The woman who had attempted to manipulate, deceive, and harm was now powerless, while the man she had underestimated was celebrated for his unwavering character. Back at the mansion, the final scene unfolded in the garden, transformed from a cold, stiff expanse into a warm and welcoming haven. Kevin, Billy, and Joshua gathered around a barbecue grill, the air fragrant with the smell of cooking food and the earthy scent of freshly mown grass. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, as laughter and conversation flowed freely, untainted by fear or tension. Joshua moved with a newfound ease, his arms still in a sling but his spirit unburdened, enjoying the simple pleasures of camaraderie and family. Joshua looked directly into the camera, his eyes reflecting the wisdom and calm that came from having endured, having stood firm against injustice, and having ultimately triumphed through integrity. "Dignity isn't about the uniform you wear," he said, his voice steady yet tender. "It's about the character you keep." The words resonated not only through the frame, but also in the hearts of those who had followed his journey, emphasizing that true worth is measured not by title or wealth, but by courage, selflessness, and unwavering commitment to what is right. Raising his glass, he continued with a hint of playful pride to cleaning up the mess. The words carried the dual weight of literal and metaphorical victory, a nod to the janitorial life that had been the backdrop of his courage, and to the broader chaos he had overcome to restore justice, dignity, and hope. Kevin and Billy raised their glasses in unison, the three of them sharing a quiet, profound bond forged through adversity, struggle, and the unwavering pursuit of integrity. The sun continued to set, casting long shadows over the garden, yet the warmth lingered, a testament to healing, restoration, and new beginnings. Laughter echoed softly, blending with the sounds of the evening, birds returning to their nests, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant murmur of the city. The screen slowly faded to black, leaving behind an indelible impression of triumph, justice served, and hearts restored. The story concluded not with grandeur or spectacle, but with human connection, courage validated, and the promise of a brighter future for all who had endured and persevered. Joshua, Kevin, and Billy stood together in that final moment, united not only by circumstance, but by choice, trust, and love. The foundation of a new life built on respect, dignity, and unwavering integrity. The mansion, the community center, and the bonds they had forged stood as monuments to resilience, compassion, and the transformative power of justice tempered with grace. If you were inspired by Joshua's journey and the unwavering courage of those who stand for what is right, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of triumph, heart, and justice. Together, we can celebrate the heroes who clean up the mess, both in the world and in our hearts.